Welcome everyone to this review of a really interesting lens. This is the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 lens. I've had this lens now for a few weeks and I want to get into some of the positives and downsides with this lens that a lot of people online, reviewers, haven't necessarily mentioned. This is a really tough one to suggest, so I really want to make it clear some of the reasons why I don't necessarily recommend this lens. After unboxing, you'll notice right away a really small lens, which actually has a really tiny footprint. It's so small that I believe on the Fuji mount, you have to actually make sure that you always cap the rear side in order to have this glass element not scrape the surface that you put it on. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now looking at the front, there's this switch here that acts as a lens cap in order to open and close the lens, which is really cool. I do love that about this. One of the things you'll notice right away with this lens is just how hazy the overall image is. So what I find is that I'm increasing the dehaze slider a considerable amount to say plus 35 or so in order to just get a little more contrast in the scene, and then even bumping it a little bit here, because without it, looking at the basic image, it just looks really quite flat. So I would suggest increasing the dehaze with this lens almost every single time you go to use it. Now let's go look at the next image here. And as you can see, again, the contrast is ultra low without having the dehaze slider cranked up. And let's just try and crank the contrast slider by itself. And yeah, that does help as well, but I'd say a bit of a mix between the two has the best chance of increasing the overall look. Now looking at the image right now, the bokeh looks nice and smooth in here. It actually looks pretty good. I don't hate the bokeh that this lens produces, but the problem is there's a lot of shots that you'll be getting with this lens that just don't turn out because they're so washed out. Now this one here looks pretty good. Bokeh in the background looks all right. This is with profile corrections turned on. This image here seemed to do quite well, despite it being a somewhat high contrast scene, with the center being quite sharp. Just adjusting some of the highlights and playing with the image right now, showing you some of the range that it has when editing it. Center sharpness looks pretty good. Corners look a little bit soft. I'll have to admit that. It's not amazing in the corners, but it's okay considering its price. You have to remember the price of this lens, and the sharpness that it provides is exceptional. Let's go to the next one now. And then again, you can see the corners, they look actually pretty good. This is just with the basic profile adjustment here. Everything seems to be pretty good in terms of distortion here. And like you can just see the sharpness in this photo. It's really quite good, especially with that being on the sides there. Looking at the middle of the image, looks pretty consistent, like all the way through. On a shot like this, you get a really good example of how sharp it can be when it's in a cloudy, overcast sort of condition. You can see that there's really great sharpness, especially for a lens this price. And I know it's something that I keep saying over and over again, but you can really see that this does well for the price in certain conditions. Now you can see how flat this image started out to look, and then just by adjusting the contrast and also the dehaze, it added a much more desirable image, unless you're looking for a washed out one. This image was a little surprising for me considering how high of a contrast scene this was with the sun star making its appearance. I think this image looked quite nice. I'm going to show you in a second here how this lens looks when shot in black and white, where I think it really shines best. Because of the colors from this, for me, they're not spectacular to look at when eliminating the use of colors just into black and white. I think it really makes this a really valuable lens, especially for street photography and other purposes like that. Okay, let's go into a comparison with this Viltrox and my Voigtlander Ultron 28mm f2 version 2. This is an M mount lens. However, I've adapted it to my Nikon camera. Looking at this Viltrox lens, you can see in the mountains here that bit of like a purple haze. It's very slight, but when you look at now at the Voigtlander, you'll see that that's gone. These are with settings very similar. Sorry, the framing is a little bit different. I do apologize for that. I'm shooting now with the Voigtlander at f8. So there may be a little bit more sharpness in some of the corners here. However, I think the Viltrox does quite well at f4.5. It's not as sharp. However, you don't expect a landscape shot to be as sharp. And then now looking in the middle here, whoops, let's see. This is the Viltrox, and this is the Voigtlander. So in the middle, I think they're pretty close to similar. However, I think the one thing that's really noticeable here is the amount of vignette that you get in the corners. This is the Voigtlander, and now this is the Viltrox lens. Now, without profile corrections, this is what the Viltrox looks like, and then this is what the Voigtlander looks like. Comparing the two. In my opinion, I think the colors look much more natural with this Voigtlander lens, as most people would probably expect. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you pay more money, you'll get a much more natural looking image with much more natural looking colors. While this lens is ultra convenient, it does come with many downsides that should be known that will affect your usage and overall outcome with the lens. The amount of light in a scene can make or break your usage with this lens, with a lot of times it breaking it, considering there's no ability to attach external ND filters on this lens. When I put this on my Nikon Z6III, which is currently recording me now, it's really nice and light. However, I noticed that when I'm using it, the footage is just ultra shaky, and that's because there's not much weight in the front to balance the body of the camera. So I did find that even with in-body stabilization on stabilization, that I was not able to properly stabilize the footage unless I was really being careful to try and control that. Now, the autofocus in this, while not being amazing, I do find that it is acceptable for the most part. Looking at the start of this vlog style content that I was recording to test, you could see that it had focus at the start and lost it almost the entire time after that, with it gaining focus again near the end of the video. So I would say that it's not very reliable in terms of autofocus. Now, one issue that I really have with this is the transitions. They're smooth, but they take quite a while going in between. And sometimes there is some hesitation pulsing back and forth, which is not ideal for shooting video. And with no manual focus ring on this, another negative. I mean, it looks like there is a manual focus ring on it, but this is just for show. I think it's just a grip for you to apply this onto your camera. Okay, I'm going to get into my final thoughts with the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 lens for Nikon specifically. I think this is a great lens if you're wanting something to substitute other lenses that you have. It's more of a toy rather than a lens that you can seriously do professional work with. Can you get some nice photos? Yes. Is the background bokeh nice on it? Yes. It can be pretty decent compared to a lot of other lenses in this price range. However, any amount of sun in the scene that you're in can completely wash out the image that you're trying to capture. So it has so few use cases, in my opinion, that I think that you're really going to be handicapped with the use of this. So I can't say that I recommend purchasing this lens unless you have something already that covers this range that you're going to use most of the time. A lot of reviewers have been speaking so positively about this lens that I'm a little bit confused because I didn't see as much of a use case with it as these other reviewers have claimed. Anyways, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you plan to use this lens in the future, or if you have used it already, what your thoughts were on it. Thank you all. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.